Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds. Hello, it's Mike McMahon again. I'm your host of Harvesting Wisdom, and today I have really the pleasure of having two friends that I've gotten to know fairly recently that are from Zimbabwe, and they're involved with architecture and with a lot of livestock management. The first guy I met here next to me is Arnold Payne, and from Zimbabwe, from Bulawayo, is Tiki. And when I met Arnold, it was when we were doing, it was COVID, and we were doing a food drive. UFE at that point, you know, we couldn't put gardens in or do any work, couldn't go to schools, so we ended up giving away about 1 million pounds of food in areas in Phoenix that were hit pretty hard with just the distribution problem with getting food to people. And Arnold shows up and walked up to me. And first thing I got to say is that people who volunteer at 5 a.m. in the middle of the summer in Phoenix are either crazy or it says a lot about their character. And Arnold was there, and we got to talking, and I told him we were in Africa, and he said he was from Africa. And then later on, he had called and talked to me, and he said, "Hey, I want to feed my people. Can you come to Zimbabwe, and can you help?" And I mean, I don't know how much help I can do, but our program is pretty well structured, and I'd love to see it adopted in Zimbabwe. But I got to thinking last night, I have a lot of people on this podcast, authors, politicians, sometimes celebrities, and, a lot of farmers here and that kind of thing. And I got to think, this podcast actually, for me, is it's a lot more special. And I started to think about my roots and what both Tiki and Arnold have gone through in their lives, and I think there's some parallel. So I grew up in Buffalo in the 60s and 70s, and Buffalo was falling apart. It was called the Rust Belt. We had 5 major steel companies that went belly up. The grain silos were no longer being used. At one point, they housed all the grain for the Eastern Seaboard. It was probably unofficially about 25% unemployment. The cities were falling apart. We had a mixture of people in Buffalo. We had Italians that had one part of town, and the Germans and the Polish, and then the blacks and the Irish, and the Jews were in a different part. And there was some polarization, but we worked together. We all lived together. And I started to think, there was prejudice at that time. And I think that was something that obviously we saw in Africa, and we saw it and here in the U.S. we had Martin Luther King, and over there that's Nelson Mandela. So there's some parallels to trying to get justice for people. But some of these things went back hundreds and hundreds, maybe even 1,000 years of culture. And I do see, and I'm optimistic at how things are changing, but sometimes, as we go forward, we're going backwards quite a bit too. Anyway, I left Buffalo, and while I was there, another parallel is my father in early 70s had a pretty successful business that basically tanked. It was he was in the charter business, and so he had 7 of us in the family. A lot of stress, didn't handle the stress too well, but he scraped and survived and raised us. But during that time period, my mother was very religious, and she taught second graders in a Catholic school basically for free for about 34 years. During that time also, I remember she was a baker. So every day I'd go home and she'd have a loaf of bread or a coffee cake or a cake or a pie. And then sure as anything at night at dinner time, that wasn't there because she was always giving it away to somebody who just lost a husband or a kid who was in a hospital or whatever. And I don't think I particularly appreciated it because I was hungry and I wanted that pie. And I was like, God, why, what are you doing? Why do you keep doing this stuff? And then I started to draw a little parallel with when I went over to Zimbabwe and I talked to your brother and you and found out about your father. And your father's a preacher, and you told me he doesn't really live in this world. He'd give the shirt off his back. And I could kind of feel the same thing from you. It's like you and I are business guys. We're reality guys. And, we don't 100% appreciate it, but at the same time, you can't separate it from your core. So Buffalo had its kind of dark period, and so is Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe with the president, the dictator, Mugabe. Basically, about 2003, expropriated all the land and started to giving it to people who were from there, which is, you could say, hey, there's justice in that. The problem is the people who had been there for a couple of generations and had put in capital and time and started farming and started industries, a lot of them ended up getting booted out of the country, and they lost everything they had. And the big problem with the policy wasn't the intention. The problem was there was no capacity building for the people who ended up with the farms. They didn't have capital to buy equipment. They didn't have the know-how to do things. And so for 20 years, Zimbabwe really has been in the dark. The unfortunate thing from my perspective, and people from Zimbabwe can call and tell me they hate me, but that same party that he was the leader of won the election again this year. So it takes some time to change, but I do see the same concepts that I have, that Tiki and both you and Arnold, I know you do things, some things you do, like the nonprofit stuff, you don't even realize it, but the influence is probably your dad, like it is my mom. And I know for you, Tiki, you're really saving the environment and the animals in the bush. And we're going to get into that whole rewilding thing in a minute. But I've got to say that of all the people I've met, you two guys probably have impressed me more or inspired me more, because I went out and I saw your operation with Matthew, your head of operations out there, and I was blown away at the scale that you were doing things. So I'm going to start with you, Tiki, to explain this whole rewilding concept, which by the way, at that time, I didn't know that much about it. Since then, I've read a whole bunch of books. There's an author from South Africa that's super famous that's done this stuff, but I can't imagine there being more than a half dozen. I only know of one or two other projects the scale and the size of you that you have. I don't know, 15,000 hectares, and you're right in the bush, and the animals are left to come in and out of the farm that you've created, and it just blew me away. And I got to tell you that, and on top of it, you never really talk about it. And I asked you, hey, you have photographs? Are you announcing this to people? Are you taking donations? Are you getting U.S. aid or aid from Africa or anybody? And no, you're doing what I do, which is not the smartest thing in the world. You're putting your own money and your own effort and your own sweat into it. And you probably get, honestly, you probably get shit from your own family members and friends asking you what the hell you're doing. And you don't need to do it, but here you are, you're doing it. And I got to think that that drive has to come from you guys seeing what should be and knowing that it's not there. So your brother took me to Victoria Falls from
Bulawayo.
Bulawayo. Sorry, I've been there and I still can't pronounce it. But he took me on what should have been about a 2-hour drive at the most. The way I drive, an hour and a half, maybe, And it took 4.5 hours because there were so many potholes. And it was a toll road, too. So they were collecting money. And for 20 years, they didn't even fill potholes on one of the major arteries in the country. And I know that kind of thing is what you guys see, and it drives you crazy. So, Tiki, I'm going to first start and have you talk to me about your business operations and how you started doing this farming and this rewilding out in the bush, and just let it go. Tell me what you got.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat, and greetings to you and Arnold and your audience. My you're 100% correct in that my motive is driven because I know the potential of what can be there. I grew up in this particular area where we visited on your trip to Zimbabwe. Um, I grew up in that area. I know the potential of the resources that are there. Bottom line, in Zimbabwe, we've had serious population growth in the last 100 years. I've only witnessed the last 20 years of it. But yes, there's politics. In any place in the world, there's politics, which I don't really want to get into. But the bottom line, like I say, is that this huge population growth. I mean, 100 years ago, we had million people less in Zimbabwe, well, what's now Zimbabwe. Today we've got 15 million. So the farming practices have not evolved as much as the population has grown. Traditionally, and our country is an agricultural based country. It's got a lot of farmers. I think about 90% of our land is agricultural and forest land. So you've got additional land pressures or serious land pressures that have built up over the last 100 years on one resource, or related to our one resource, which is our land. So because the farming practices haven't changed, and the traditional sort of farming practices are subsistence level grain production and hunting, which today you could call poaching, but that's the traditional way of sustaining your family. Problem is we've got 15 million people, and the land cannot sustain that type of agriculture. So our agricultural practices have not kept up. So that's led to one thing, which is degradation of the resources. In fact, the only thing that has evolved is methods of harvesting timber, wildlife, fish. So these resources have been completely overutilized. We're trying to educate farmers, educate land users on modern farming practices, more intensive farming projects, so that they can, okay, and the best way of creating an incentive for the farmer is for him to generate a profit. If he can generate a profit from his land, on a slightly different production model, which still incorporates his traditional grain, his traditional livestock, specifically cattle. If he can generate profits from his land, then he doesn't have to harvest as much from the same piece of land. And so we're trying to create a commercial model which farmers can implement, conserving the wildlife and the natural resources that are there, and market their product in a way that they can generate profits, use those profits and grow their business. And the spin-off from that, for me, is protection of the natural resources, and specifically of the wildlife and the ecology of the general area, because it's a beautiful piece of land. It's a beautiful country. It's got a wealth of natural resources. They just need to be protected, conserved, and I think that will make a big difference in the long-term survival of our natural resources.
Right. So I'm going to ask you some more detailed questions on that. But Arnold, I've got you sitting here. I want to ask you about the safari business that you have, because you and Tiki also run the safaris. So it's not just agriculture for vegetables and fruits and grains that's going on that you're involved with, Tiki, but the entire concept of the bush. This is the last place on Earth that is wild and natural, and we're seeing a lot of it being degraded and being used up because of the pressure of the populations. But tell me about the safari. What got you into that? It's just the love of animals, or what was that all about?
Well, no, in a nutshell, I grew up as a young man in Zimbabwe, very similar to a lot of guys that have families that have farms, and we come from a family with a farm. On the weekends, out fishing and chasing animals and having a good time, and always wanting to be out in the bush. So the passion's always been there, particularly for wildlife and the love of the land. There's a deep connection to the land. With that said, many years later, here I am back in the safari industry. And just to go ahead and just touch on some of the stuff Tiki was alluding to, the safaris that we run, and we're very in a very good situation. We run safaris in some of the biggest safari areas in all of Africa, bar none. The reason we're able to do that there is obviously because of the knowledge and the things that were implemented and put in place by people that have since passed the old Zimbabweans, those in the old days that set aside big, vast tracts of land for wildlife and said, listen, guys, now it's yours to go ahead and move with. Tiki talked about knowing the potential of what we have on the ground. We wouldn't be able to conduct a lot of these safaris in these areas were it not for making sure that we engage the local communities, because as he talked about, the population in Zimbabwe is not where it was prior. So there's a want for land, there's a want for resources. Unemployment in Zimbabwe is over 90%. I repeat, 90%.
Wow.
So as a result, people need food. They need things to do. So if you have a safari area, for argument's sake, you have people that want to ultimately move on to that particular property and say, I need food to eat. What we say is, hold on, let's see if we can either find work for you, employment, or if we can't find employment, let's see if we can improve on your respective area so that we minimize human-wildlife conflict. Because that wildlife's we need the wildlife to be there, but at the same time, people need to eat. So with that said, what's unique about what we have is we have wildlife populations. Thankfully, right now we're having a bit of a challenging rainy season, but we have wildlife populations that continue to go ahead and increase as a result of all the same things Tiki was touching on, making sure we utilize the land accordingly, making sure that we take care of the environment. But the biggest factor, back to what you're doing, is we have to educate the population. We have to educate people how to feed themselves. And people can say, but how does that tie into a safari? If you don't educate people how to feed themselves, then people are going to go ahead and use the same land where all the tourists come and enjoy the beautiful wildlife of Africa. They want to eat the animals. As crazy as it sounds, they have to eat. They have to eat. Or if they don't eat the animals, they need to ultimately move onto that respective land and take the land away from your elephants and your zebra and your wildebeest and your lion and your Cape buffalo and 100 other species. Right. There's just no two ways. So
and do what humans do best, which is annihilate
destroy
all the species on the planet.
Destroy. Right? So basically, in a short closing on that note, the model that we ultimately have in our safari areas is not just making sure that we maintain the wildlife and have these incredible areas where we, everybody can wine and dine and be in the middle of Africa seeing all this great stuff, but have the tourists, or should I say the friends that we ultimately bring in, have them engage the local communities as well that live in the safari areas that we run, and on the fringes of the safari areas, see the programs that we're putting in place. So whether it's a school, in that particular school, if we don't improve on the situation in that school and the kids don't get an education or find some way to get some kind of an employment, those kids are going to be saying, listen, we need something to eat, and we're going to eat what's in that safari area. Or in a local community where the chief is saying, my village is hungry, we have no food. So as a result, we need to come to you for food, or you have to kill a few animals to give to us. We're saying no. Let's educate you on how you can provide for yourself, be it drilling boreholes, wells for water, helping them so that they now have water, and then, as Tiki was touching on, giving them the respective tools and knowledge so they can grow their own food, and we can assist. That's the future.
Right.
That's the future of Africa, bar none.
And so right now in Africa, both in Malawi, what I saw in Ethiopia, what you guys have going on, it's primarily rain-fed agriculture. And the primary crop everywhere is corn, which is not African. It's from Mexico. But people in Africa think that it was their birthright, that that's what they have. Problem with corn is that, first of all, it's not the most nutritious of all products. It's more of a filler on every plate. The other issue is that people will grow on lands that are theirs or not theirs, but they're growing the same place over and over again, and then strip the nutrient base, and then they have to go to new areas. In the bush, they're growing corn even in there, but they're also, killing, the wild animals to eat. So we're just seeing. I think in this part of the world and maybe down in the Amazon, we're seeing the last natural parts of the world that are part of our worldwide ecosystem really before our eyes falling apart. So what is amazing, though, is I've seen this throughout Africa. Occasionally there's some corporate farms that are really European or American or Asian, where they're growing cash crops that they export. So they go in and they bring in the fertilizers and they bring in the irrigation and the know-how, and then the people work the farms and they grow this product, and most of it gets exported. It doesn't really do a lot to help the Africans. It's not, the base thing would be make sure the people who live in the country can eat first before you take resources and remove them from the country. But what I saw for the first time was your farm, Tiki. So explain the farm a little bit, what you and Matthew are doing down there, because you're growing stargrass, you're using center pivots, you're pulling off the river, and then you have all these homesteads of people who live there, like right in that same big, what is it, about 15,000 hectares. I think that's 30,000 acres. And I know your family has more land. You have more land than I would say most American commercial farmers have. But talk to me about, and then you have your cattle program going. Tell me about the theory behind what you're doing. And I got to say, it's working, and it's pretty amazing. It's really inspiring.
Thank you, Mike. The topic of tourism and what Arnold and I do, in this particular case, the wildlife production is just another form of land use that we're promoting the farmers to engage in. So, we're trying to add value to the wildlife to protect it. And I believe that we're successful. There is human-wildlife conflict, but we're managing it. And that all just comes in simply by educating, assisting, cooperating, coexisting, collaborating with each other on how these models work to prevent the human wildlife conflict. So the tourism is one of the products that this farmer can use, and he's got the resources. Yes, he needs some capital, like any business. Capital input is the biggest problem, and these farmers don't have the capital. The banks, they can't borrow from the banks. They don't have equity. Banks, the risk is too high for the banks to lend to them, so they don't have the capital to input into these projects, which is obviously the first step in any commercial entity, is the capital that you're going to employ. Mm-hmm. So this is where we sort of coming in, and we're hoping to create more, or to demonstrate the benefits and the potential of strategic alliances between the private sector and the landowners and the farmers. And it comes in, like you mentioned earlier, obviously a lot of this money we're pulling from our own pockets. So there's a role to play by with the aid organizations, but it's got to be sustainable. There's, you see a lot of cases where the farmer won't have water. So, somebody will come along and drill him a well and leave the next day. Well, the water's no good to him because he doesn't know what to do with it. He probably doesn't know how to pump the water out of the hole. If he gets a pump too and the pump breaks, he doesn't know how to fix the pump. So the issue is, what do you do? Yes, there's capital needed, there's some aid needed, but more than that, you've got to be able to educate the recipients to make it sustainable. Once it's sustainable, then I think you've got a long-term or much longer-term answer. Teach a man to fish, same concept.
Sure.
So in this case, in the area where we went to visit, um, um, cattle genetics, part of what I was mentioned earlier, that traditional farming methods haven't really kept up with the increased population. So if you just take the livestock, cattle production on that piece of land or in that area, the genetics is very poor, the nutrition is poor. Any cattle rancher will know that you need good nutrition, you need fertility in the cattle, you need good genetics, and these farmers don't have access to it. So we put pivots into and with pasture. It's a very low rainfall area. If I go back to your corn or your maize crop issue, with the increased land pressure, people have moved to areas of much lower rainfall where they never used to farm before, but they've been forced to go there because it's the only available land. The cattle suffer just as much because every 3-4 years you have a drought season. I believe we're going into one now. We've got high probability of El Nino effect and forecast a bad season this rainy season. So we've put pastures in to maintain the breeding cattle through the drought years. These pastures this is our contribution to the community. It's our capital input of building the dam to capture the water, putting the center pivots in, of growing the crop. But the long-term objective is to have a resource available for the farmers in the area to use for their cattle in the dry season, and the breeding cows, when they circulating, will come onto those pastures, hopefully improve their fertility, and then their health. And then we've bought some bulls. We've bought 2 Brahman bulls, 2 indigenous Tuli bulls that are on those pastures. So anyone in the community, when they've got cows ready to breed, they bring them onto the pasture. They eat the pasture. Their health improves. They circulate. They breed with the improved genetics. And it's just one little effort to add to the farmer's profitability as much as we can at every opportunity. So there's some tourism going on. There's a tourism model that he can sell. We're trying to have access to resources for him to improve his cattle productivity. But these things, like I said earlier, have got to be sustainable. So in the beef model, yes, we've contributed 4 bulls to the project, but the farmers have also got to, or the recipients have got to also play their role and feel ownership in the project, because then they tend to look after it and be more involved. If there's bulls there that they're not responsible for, they're not accountable for, well, when those bulls are gone in 5 years' time, they'll wait for somebody else to bring some more bulls.
Right.
Or they'll revert back to where they were, which is no good. So the bulls are there, but which is the capital investment, the running cost of that operation, the farmer's got to contribute to and do his part. We can't be employing labor to plant pasture when the farmer or the community stands to benefit from it. Their role, their contribution would be the labor to plant the pasture. And for every day that you run your cows with the bull, pay some money towards the bull so that we can collectively replace the bull, so that it becomes a long-term solution, not just a short-term
How much extra
solution.
weight, how much extra meat are you now seeing using the new genetics versus the old? What's the original cows were pretty skinny. What are you seeing now?
The weight the these bulls have been there for 2 years, so we're just seeing the steers coming through now,
Ah, okay.
the offspring of those bulls. The carcasses are much better. Their potential to gain weight is much better. They're getting higher conception rates on their cows. So just the conception rate, fertility is the big issue um, at this stage for these farmers, for these communities. You know, they're not at the point where they're fine tuning meat gain, but if their fertilities generally have been very poor. If their fertilities can increase from 50% to 80%, well,
Wow.
just the number of calves is going to produce a lot more meat for that farmer than anything else. So
Right.
that's the stage we're at now. Step one, improve your fertilities and your conception rates and your genetics. And I think that those will have a significant improvement to the herd. So, and we're also promoting intensive livestock production, which is not really a traditional. Um, it's not
Model over
really
there.
considered by traditional farmers. Layer hens, which you can do. Even if you've got an acre, you can produce a decent amount of product on that acre
I saw
just by doing
guinea pigs when I was there, and
rabbits, pigs,
rabbits. Sure.
layers. We've done some of the farmers. We've got we've encouraged like a cooperation of pecan nut growers, and we've tied up a market for the nuts. So and we've managed to finance the initial trees. So all that the farmer's got to do now is water the tree and replace the tree and use his nut sales to increase his orchard. Um, so these are all things that he can do. Like I say, main issue is that there's too many people not too many people, but there's 15 times more people now on the land that there was 100 years ago. So
Right.
you've got to produce as much as you can from that piece of land, and you're not going to do it with traditional methods.
So what I liked, and I'll show some photos on this as well, but even the way you've diverted the river is sustainable. Um, basically those rivers kind of dry up in the
Yes.
non-drain rain season, but you've kind of diverted it and you created a little. You call it a dam, but it's more of just a diversion where you have a pond, and that actually you then took the irrigation and you moved it, and you've got 3 full center pivots right now, I think, if I remember right, and you're growing the star grass, which is high nutrition for the cattle, but you also have some of that water going to other crops that you were growing. I can't remember everything I saw there, but I noticed some leafy greens and tomatoes and a variety of other things. So you're creating a better nutrition package overall. And what I'm kind of curious on that, how much of the surrounding people and neighbors are helping with that growing, or is that's a commercial? Part of it has to be you got to cover the cost of the infrastructure, and so you have to produce a product to sell. Part of it is that you're employing people in the neighborhood too. But how much? I think when you're bringing people in, they're learning also about those other food types that they've never grown before, right?
Absolutely, Mike. That's it's yes, we're in business. Yes, we're also trying to produce as much as we can. Um, Big difficulty has always been water. We're still struggling to get enough water, but we're getting there. It's really a demonstration to the community to say, look, come and see what you can achieve on a given piece of land, just with intensive models. Um, Obviously, like I say, water is a restraint for irrigation, but once if we can provide water, look how much production you can get off 1 hectare of tomatoes, for example. 1 hectare of
Right. Oh my
tomatoes
God. Yeah.
gives you maybe 100 tons of
It's
tomatoes. That's a lot
tremendous.
of money for
Plus, the
for
seed
us.
banking for the following year gives you exponential amount of seed to be able to go and do, more land the
Yeah,
following
so
year.
grow your maize. You get personal satisfaction out of that. You
Sure.
you 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 feel that you've worked hard to feed your family because your family's going to eat. That is the staple diet in Zimbabwe. So you can't tell a man not to grow a crop that his family is the absolute staple for his family. So by all means, grow that grain, but don't focus only on that. Focus on some cash producing models that can actually
Sure.
generate you profit, and then use that profit to grow your little entity, or to
Right.
educate your kids, or whatever it might be. That it's your profit to spare. But the horticultural block that you saw, which is tomatoes and potatoes and onions, yes, we're doing it commercially, but we're trying to involve the community as much as we can and demonstrate to them what they can do and help them wherever possible. We're in the supply chain ready for the seed and the nutrients and the irrigation equipment and the fertilizers, etc. We've got vehicles moving. If somebody needs some seed or some fertilizer, they can lean on us. So together, look what we can do on this piece of land. Try and shift the focus away just from harvesting only, and not actually producing, being productive. Beekeeping
Right.
is another one. These are all things that you can do
Exactly.
just to
Sure.
generate. Yeah. You saw the trenches that we've excavated around the grain fields because there's
Yeah.
been conflict with elephants. Elephants love pumpkins and watermelons and maize, so they come into the fields, and then the farmer feels like he's lost his crop, so he calls animal protection in and wants to shoot the elephant. And we're moving backwards because you're taking away all the natural resources that are there. And you know, the leopard will kill a calf every now and again, or a hyena, and then the farmer wants to trap and kill the leopard because he's losing his livestock. So what
Sure.
can we do together to protect the leopard? Don't kill the leopard. Rather look after your livestock, or change your livestock management a little bit with areas where the cattle sleep at night, the way that you herd them during the day. Coexist with this leopard, because we can sell that leopard to or you can sell the opportunity for somebody to come photograph the leopard. Thereby, you're selling something. So at the end of the day, you as the farmer, or you as the landowner, or the person who's responsible to utilize the piece of land, you've got a much more sustainable and profitable um, a sort of plan,
Right.
to yeah, to and something that you can actually develop.
Yeah, and
Um,
what was so impressive to me is the scale that you're doing it. It doesn't.
sure.
It's not small scale model project. This is full blown commercial activity. I know you took me around. There's villages, in the area, small villages that have people who live in the villages, family units, that sort of thing. But then there's also individual plots that that people own that on their own that you guys have been helping, not just with the livestock management, but showing them different techniques. And then the equipment that you brought in, this massive excavator, the trench that you put around these properties is, to me, it was mind blowing. But how many different property owners besides you, or people using the land, that are doing stuff at that scale, that at a pretty good scale? How many of them are in just this one area? Did you tell me there was like 80 different, or maybe it was 80 hectares each they owned? I can't. Tell me a little about that.
Uh, in that particular area, each farmer has got about 500 hectares.
Oh,
It's a low rainfall area, so um, yeah, it's difficult to produce and be profitable on 500 hectares um, in that climate. But
right.
so there's about 30 farmers in that immediate surrounding that we work closely with. Our hope is to grow that. This is sort of the nucleus of the operation and of what we're trying to achieve. And in the long term, our hope is to increase that circle bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, to get the wildlife population back to where it should be, and back to a marketable level,
And
back
it,
to
it
where it yeah.
there's almost no one who's going to be able to do this. I mean, you're literally the person who's driving this that I could see in Zimbabwe, because the government can't even fix potholes. The people just don't have the resources. Your family has, I don't know how many different entities, but you obviously have heavy machinery to come in and help. You had the resources. You don't have to tell anyone on air, but I know it's in the millions of dollars that you've put into this. The project has got a fence that keeps certain animals out. The whole thing was just amazing. And then when I was looking at the Stargrass area, I saw warthogs walking around and zebras in there. And I'm like, what kind of agricultural utopian that you've created? But it's working. And the idea now is to be able to get this out to people. And hopefully UFE can help do that as well, because, you know, if you up and die, there's nobody to take over from what you've started, you know. And so that, to me, that's it was so inspiring. But the other thing is, getting back to you, Arnold, is talk to me about the safaris you've run. Now, I've done some safaris in Africa. One of them I did was pretty luxurious down in South Africa, in the Crozier area. And I've done some others in the area. But the stuff you guys do is really, no other safaris are really on par with what you're doing. And one of the safari areas was right near where you brought me down there, but also you had another one up near Victoria Falls. You got them all over the place. And at first when you told me that, don't worry about it, don't try to, because I was trying to plan my own trip in and out and try to figure out, hey, Arnold, I want to go up here and I want to go up there. And you're like, let me just take care of it. And for first of all, from anyone who considers themselves a wildlife person in the States, you haven't seen anything. You got to go to Africa, and it's just the way it is. I mean, if you haven't done it, stay ignorant and stay here. But what you've got over there is just beyond anything I've seen. And I don't know how you put this network together, but the safari people, and especially in South Africa, were good, but in Zimbabwe, the guides and everything are so knowledgeable about everything. Tell me, how have you expanded, and how you guys have done what you're doing, and how does this thing work?
Just to give you a little bit of background, a lot of people will ask this question and say, where does the model in Africa, that's the whole continent, where does the model come from when it comes to the professional guide in the field?
Oh, yeah.
That model comes from our country. So it comes from Zimbabwe, which was Rhodesia.
Right.
And that's where it all began. So if you look way, way, way back in the day, they started the model and the programs that ultimately guides needed to be trained up to a certain level. Tiki he's very humble, but he's actually a guide as well in his other life when he's not busy doing this and that. Yeah. But with that said, so that in and of itself is something that we take great pride in. So in a lot of our camps, people will say, but what makes you guys so different to the Krugers and everywhere else? Like, what makes us different is the treatment that you're going to get, the in-depth look into the wildlife, the communities, the people, the history, the culture, all the above. So to just give a little bit of an example, the area that you were in a few months ago, where you saw some of Tiki's operation, we actually have a safari camp right next door. Right next door on over 100,000 acres, very big private area. We have a safari operation. Wildlife beyond belief. But again, because of consistent management that's happened over many, 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 many years. Currently, a lot of good anti-poaching. So the anti-poaching, something that Tiki also touched on, you have to protect the animals. If you don't protect the animals will be poached by poachers. You have to engage the local communities, because with the local communities, you have to show them that there's a value in that animal, where if that animal brings in tourism, the tourism can bring in some kind of revenue where you can either be employed, or we can maybe move that around and help you and your community, whether it's drilling a borehole, whatever. So it all works together. So right next door, again, that's just one of our many camps. We have a massive area, beautiful tented safari camp. We've got a couple other camps on the property, and then again, private chefs, the whole 9 yards, 4x4 vehicles, and people come in there for that in-depth experience where they just want to get away, no cell phones, relax, see the wildlife, enjoy the wildlife. We've got Bushman cave paintings that date back thousands of years on the property. We've got walking safaris. Walking safaris is something that only certain places can do, because You have to have an armed safari guide with you.
Knows what they're doing.
We've got the opportunity for hikes. We've had people come from all across the world saying, could we do a TV show here and all the above? We're like, yeah, we can talk about what exactly do you want to do out of it, because we have access to all the above. So much wildlife, amazing opportunities. And then, of course, you've got villages nearby where people want to do a lot of volunteer work. So we have that access to do the volunteer work. It's something that's very unique. Then we move on to different parts, not too far from where you were at the Victoria Falls when you went up with us for a couple of days. And up at the Victoria Falls, we've got some camps up there. We're actually in the process of constructing a new camp. And it's just
north of that clay soil.
Exactly. So you're a soil guy. You noticed the differentiation and how ultimately everything changed as you moved up north into the north western part of the country. So you start getting close to.
It's so gorgeous. I mean, the Zambezi River and the falls and the vegetation as it changes and the trees and everything is just I mean, it's hard not to fall in love with it. When I flew in there. I had to, getting around Africa is not easy either. And you helped me because I was coming from Malawi. Direct flights would go into the capital. They weren't convenient the way I did it. So I went through your recommendation through Johannesburg again, popped in. First thing, you picked me up at the airport and just brought me over to an amazing bread and breakfast place. So we had a few beers and a great dinner, and then from there, your brother was one of the drivers, took me to Victoria.
That's right.
And I did a day safari there, and we went through all kinds of stuff. And in Victoria, I stayed at an amazing little hotel area. Just the food is off the charts. And I think for a lot of Americans, they don't realize that it's this strange dichotomy. When you go to Africa, the level of service is nothing like we've seen here ever. The quality of the food is just amazing. The people are just, whether or not they have money or not, they're smiling and they're engaging, and we don't see that here in the States. It's like we have the wealth and we don't quite connect in the same way. Like when we went out, we went to different community areas where they were doing community farming. We went out for barbecue and beers, and the whole community's out at night, and it's just kind of a special area.
It's just that level of appreciation when somebody comes into a community in Zimbabwe, for argument's sake, or into a safari camp. They're so appreciative of the fact that you're coming there to enjoy the wildlife, the people, and all the above, and appreciative that you're bringing revenue to the country, but then with that revenue, they're able to go ahead and say, listen, how do we improve in the food? How are we improving the service and all the above? So there's just that level of appreciation. And then what we're trying to do is saying, okay, we want you to appreciate to such an extent, but at the same point, what do we do so that everything becomes sustainable? Everything, whether it's the safaris and beyond, as Tiki's mentioned, it becomes sustainable. But it's that level of appreciation because we take great pride in what we do.
Sure. And we'll probably wrap this up in a few minutes here, but I want to talk about the UFE involvement and what we can do out there. So I went out there thinking this was a typical Malawi model until I saw what Tiki is doing, and I'm like, okay, that guy's the master. What do you need me for? But what we do is we try to go into the schools. That's our primary target audience because it's hard to change attitudes, perspectives of people my age, especially, but anybody that is past puberty. So we started at the primary school level and the secondary level, and schools over there are a little bit different. We're in Malawi now, and so we're trying to apply these our process over there, and I think it's very doable. You guys are big parts of the community. You're a big employer. They see what you're doing. They understand what you're doing. They really respect what you're doing, and their kids are going to some of these schools. So we've gone to some right in Bulawayo. I said the word right this time. And it's some of the stories people just wouldn't believe because when we talked to the principal there, I said, well, can we get the parents involved? And he looked at me and he said, well, there's not that many parents. Most of the fathers are gone. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And just the hill right next to where the school is, people are going and digging tunnels for gold. And the tunnels collapse and no more father. And it's not like one or two. It's like an epidemic, right? And so these schools are the institution that, and they're not funded very well and everything else. So the idea for us is coming into some of these schools and helping with that. We also do stuff with soil. Those sustainable practices. You're doing sustainable methods and profitable methods, Tiki. What we really do is our focus is on soil. And you've got a large family farm as well. It's that thing was huge. Great resources, the river right there. So, and just a few miles away, I see the cattle ranch.
Feedlot.
And I'm like, well, let's take the cattle dung over here. And it's the same thing. There's chickens, there's livestock, and the idea is engaging the livestock as part of that ecosystem and having people part of that ecosystem too, right? So I think that's so we are about ready to send you. You'd ask for like kind of a cut sheet of what we do. But the first thing is trying to determine where the need is and where we can operate. And we can operate in a lot of different places over there, but where are the resources? That's the starting point. Because what we're doing is really pedagogical. We're really showing people, look, if you can compost and you add it to your soils, and most of the soils in Africa are they're certainly better than anything in Arizona. It's similar, more similar to like California, the climate and the soils. So we don't have to enhance it that much, but we can certainly enhance it quite a bit because that fertility is what you're getting when you're growing your plants, right? The other thing is like in Malawi, we've got a pump that we pump out of the rivers. We're doing drip systems off of tanks, and first of all, it's having the native people doing these things themselves to understand that ability to do it. Tiki, you're 100% right. On an individual standpoint, they have to be able to create not just livelihood for their families, but they need to be able to make a little bit of money because you need capital to do the things we're talking about. In this world, you need, and a place, and Zimbabwe's a little, considerably more dry than maybe than Ethiopia or Malawi would be. So you do have to have some assist with some irrigation with the amount of population pressure that you have, that and the soils. And so that'll be our first step is kind of walking through some of the things we're doing. I'm in the, I've been saying it for years now, I'm in the middle of writing 4 different books that relate to this. One is the urban gardening book, and the other 2 are compost and vermicompost, and then one on actual landscape and irrigation. So at some point I'll share them, but there's tons of literature already out there. It's just people don't have a lot of time to read or see it. In Africa, there's not a lot, the majority of the population is on the wrong side of the digital divide. They don't have access to computers or internet. So what we're doing is literally kind of changing perspectives on a hands-on method, and that's really what you guys are doing. And the scale you're doing it at is amazing. So we want to try to get people aware of what we're doing, try to get some people involved with what we're doing. The name of your safari is Africa?
Name of the safari company, very easy to remember. Run Wild African Safaris. Just thinking of Run Wild. So Running Wild African Safaris is the name of the safari company.
Amazing. And I from a guy who's been to Africa several times, I got to say that this would be certainly one of the big places that you would want to go. You probably end up coming from the States, going through South Africa. Cape Town, Johannesburg, great places, lots of cool things going on, but definitely making it up to Zimbabwe, that Bulawayo area, and I never even made it further east to the ruins and that kind of thing next trip, but going into Victoria Falls, and I mean, I saw less than 1/10%, and I was impressed. But for anybody who's contemplating this, I highly recommend reaching out to Arnold and meeting Tiki while you're there. And I appreciate your time. You need to drink a little bit of this wine. So we grew the grapes for this. Tiki, we got to get you growing some grapes, maybe some hops and some barley, and to be able to brew your own beers. The other thing out
Delicious
there
wine.
is groundnuts, because and beans, because we want to rotate every 3 or 4 years some legumes into what you're doing. Just a lot of cool things that I think, just a shared experience of people. I think people, when they go international, and I know, Tiki, you went to school in South Africa and you went to school here in the States.
In the US.
One of the things you don't ever even talk about is, for the listeners, is Arnold was one of the top runners in the world in the 400, I think. Made it to the Olympic team, to the national team, and just a life of exploration and a thirst for life that you both have is really inspirational. And I know thousands of people all over the world, and not too many guys can impress or inspire me like the two of you do. So I do raise my glass to you both. Also, we have a gift that is kind of a starting process that I'll bring in. Rodolfo can give it to you guys. So we're going to give you a drone.
Wow.
And I'd like you guys to drone, and Tiki, I'll bring you a bottle of wine when we're there, but this is one of
Thank you,
our
Mike.
wines.
Let me just.
And the drone will allow you to fly over your property. You can use it for any purposes, checking out where wild animals might be breaking in.
Wonderful.
I want to
Thank you,
definitely
Mike.
fly your property and see what we have. So,
Wonderful. Wonderful.
but I
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
the two of you today. I went a little longer than I normally do, but I did a lot of talking, and it's because you guys are so cool to me that I was inspired to do that. So I'm back out there in probably May, June again. By then, hopefully, we'll start. We do things on a smaller scale than you're doing, but our concept is it's all about teaching people these processes. Yes. That's what we're trying to do. We're not doing the actual growing. There's plenty of people in Africa who know how to grow. We're just showing them different methods, techniques, and working with you, and you're already doing a lot of that stuff too. So I appreciate you both here today, and
Thank you, Mike, for having us.
I'm sure we'll have you back both on the podcast. Maybe we'll do a podcast. Joe and I will come out there of June, and we'll do a podcast in the field.
That will be wonderful.
All righty. Thank you both.
Thank you very
Mike.
much. Thanks, Tiki.
Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.